Hi, podcast listeners. Kinsey Moreland here to tell you about some changes we're trying out. We are going to be dropping most of the podcasts we produce here at Voice of San Diego into the main Voice of San Diego podcast feed. We'll be treating the feed the same way we do our website, producing a variety of stories and shows we think Voice of San Diego listeners should hear. We've got podcasts covering local business, arts, and more. And now you'll be able to listen to all of them by subscribing to just the one Voice of San Diego podcast feed. The only show we're keeping separate for now is Good Schools for All. So if you're interested in stories about education, make sure you search for Voice of San Diego's Good Schools for All podcast in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Email us at podcast@voiceofsandiego.org if you've got feedback. Thanks for listening.
Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored in part by a proud supporter of Make-A-Wish. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members, foundations, and sponsors like Make-A-Wish. We are very grateful for all of our supporters, and we recognize their support in our shows. If you crave adventure, love the outdoors, and welcome a challenge, then the Make-A-Wish Trailblaze Challenge is for you. The Trailblaze Challenge is a one-day, 28-mile endurance event along the Pacific Crest Trail. It's open to all levels from novice to advanced outdoor enthusiasts. Visit www.trailblazechallengesd.org to learn more. Proceeds benefit Make-A-Wish. Challenge yourself in 2018, meet new people, and make a difference for children with critical illnesses. Voice of San Diego podcasts are also sponsored in part by a proud supporter of Monarch School. Monarch School educates students impacted by homelessness, helping them develop hope for a future with the necessary skills and experience for personal success. Monarch is holding its annual fundraiser, Building Bright Futures, on April 26th. Join event chairs Tracy Hoffman and recent Hall of Fame inductee Trevor Hoffman at this event. Find out more at monarchschools.org/events. And if you like Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor too, contact development@voiceofsandiego.org.
Welcome to I Made It in San Diego, Voice of San Diego's podcast about the region's businesses and the people who built them. I'm Dallas McLaughlin, and in this week's show, I sat down with San Diego music legend Tim Mays. Chances are, if you ever played in a band in San Diego, then you know who Tim is. The co-founder of numerous bars and clubs, including the Casbah, Starlite, and Turf Club, Tim has made a lasting imprint not only on San Diego culture, but underground and indie music across the country. The mythical, the legend, Tim Mays.
You stick around long enough, you can become legend. You know, anybody can do that.
I remember when I was when I turned 21, I was finally able to go to the Casbah. I came in for a show. I cannot, for the life of me, remember what show. I want to guess it was like Unsteady or something. And I walk in, and my friend was with me, Nick. He was like, "Dude, that's Tim Mays." And like we pointed at the bar, and I couldn't even tell you if it was you or not. It could have been somebody else.
It could have been Tim Piles.
It could have been Piles. It could have been Willie, for God's sakes. I don't know who it was. But somebody's like, "That's Tim Mays," and we were like, "Oh no, we got to be quiet for some reason," you know.
The beauty of the whole club thing, especially if you got an over 21 club, is that somebody always turns 21 every day.
Yeah,
you know, so there's a never-ending stream of new people who've been unable to get in, or maybe have snuck in here and there, but then they turn 21 and they're able to finally, okay, we can go, and that's sustained us for so many years,
and probably still does.
Still every day.
Tim is a native Southern Californian, but what ended up bringing him to San Diego was not what most people who've been to the Casbah might have imagined.
I was born in Los Angeles. I lived there until my parents got divorced in about the age of 9. My sisters and I have 2 sisters. We moved with my mom to Barstow.
Barstow,
yes.
City of Dreams.
Yes, this is the early 60s. My mom's parents lived there, and my mom's My mom's stepfather actually was a contractor who built houses. So they gave my mom a house.
Nice.
And that's why we moved up there. And I went to school there and 1 year of community college. Then I transferred down here to go to San Diego State in 73.
And what was the reasoning for coming down here?
Oddly enough, looking back, it was because I liked the San Diego State football team back then in the 60s and early 70s, Don Coryell years.
Yeah.
To this day, I'm not a big football fan now, but back then that was something that put the city on my radar.
Tim started as an accounting major, but quickly realized he had a much more creative side and ended up getting a degree in telecom and film instead. There was only one problem with that.
There was no industry in San Diego for that, so you had to move to L.A.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to move to L.A. And during my last year in college, I kind of started getting into punk rock. There were a couple people in the film department who were, into punk rock, and one of them was in a local band called the Scoings, who were very early, like 77, 78 punk rock band in San Diego. And so I became interested in music, and after I graduated, I had a job working for an artist in Coronado who's a friend, just working in his studio. And I kind of I had a friend in Orange County who I'd grown up with in Barstow, and we got the idea to put on a couple concerts in Barstow.
Wow.
So, because it was our hometown, we knew a lot of people, so we booked a couple bands from Orange County to go up there and play a couple different shows in like a USO hall. And
do you remember the bands at all?
There was a band called Earthquake, California Rainbow. I still have the flyers for these shows.
Really?
And this was like 1979 probably. And we put on these shows, and they both did really well. And then we decided, me and my friend started going to L.A. to see bands like at Hong Kong Cafe and the Whiskey and Madame Wong's and places like that. And so we decided to put on a show in L.A. And we rented a hall called Bases Hall in East L.A., or East Hollywood, actually, and put on a show with the Weirdos, the Plugs, Suburban Lawns, and the Penetrators, who were from San Diego.
Yeah, I love it.
And we did that, and that was a huge success. We turned away people at the door. We were just like, wow, this is amazing. And right at that time, there was a thing in San Diego called the Skeleton Club, and a girl named Laura Fraser ran that, and she somehow heard about my show in L.A. and somehow got a hold of me and asked me if I wanted to be her partner. So I gave her $1,000 and became her partner in the Skeleton Club. This was in like February of 1980.
And that was down here in San Diego?
That was on the corner of 2nd and Market.
Oh, wow.
Downtown. At the time, the police department was 2 blocks away.
Uh-huh.
And back then, punk rockers were not looked upon with very much goodwill or anything, especially by the police, because, they would see us coming in and going out every time they went out on their patrols. So we got a lot of harassment from the police department then. We lasted about, I think we closed in May, so it was only about 4 months because of a police licensing issue that back then you could either have a concert license, which allowed you to have all ages, but no dancing, or you could have a dance permit, which would only allow you to have people 17 years and older, and they could dance.
Sounds like Footloose or something.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. And so, obviously we wanted all ages, and the question came down to what constitutes dancing. And, back then it was all pogoing and jumping around, and the police department construed that as dancing, so they cited us a couple times, and we just decided we couldn't deal with that and closed. And from then on, I started managing a band and started putting shows on at the Spirit Club.
Oh, wow.
Which was pre-Brick by Brick days when Jerry Herrera ran it. And then became involved with a group called Dead or Alive, who were putting on punk rock concerts at places like the North Park Lions Club and Fairmount Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of started there.
Tim started working with the booking group called Dead or Alive, but soon after, the group disbanded. In 1982, Tim started his own company called Tim Mays Presents. He still had random day jobs, but nothing that stuck. Tim just liked going to shows, and his side booking gig wasn't really about making money. It was about making sure the bands he liked came to San Diego.
You know, sometimes you'd make money, sometimes you'd lose money. I didn't know anything about how to run a show at all when I first started doing my own company. So I you learn pretty quickly when the mistakes you make cause you to lose money.
Yeah.
So then I started doing shows of my own at the North Park Lions Club, at the Adams Avenue Theater, Carpenter's Hall in Golden Hill. I'm still doing stuff at Spirit Club. And probably, I think I started, we opened our first bar so this went up through about 86. Mm-hmm. And for a while that I was unemployed and just trying to live off whatever I had coming in from concerts, which wasn't a lot, Mm-hmm. Rent was cheap back then. You had 3 or 4 roommates. 86, 2 friends and I, Pete English and Bob Bennett, opened the Pink Panther.
So at this point, you're unemployed, you're not making a ton of money, so what encouraged you to say, hey, I know what I should do?
Well, I mean, we all 3 of us, my 2 other partners and I, we were all involved in music and culture. Uh-huh. And my partner Bob had a vintage clothing store for years. Peter had a place called Kings Road Cafe on 30th, which is near where Tornado is now. So we all had a big social network. This was before social network was a thing.
You had a real social
network. We had
network.
A lot of friends.
Yeah.
So we figured we could open a bar where our friends would come to. Uh-huh. And we'd always wanted to open a bar. We between the 3 of us, we always put on parties and liked doing things like that. So we decided, let's open a bar. And we approached the first bar we approached, the Pink Panther on Marina Boulevard, near where the High Dive is now. The guy wanted to sell it. We sent in a friend of ours posing as a broker because we had no idea how to approach the guy. So we sent in this girl we knew, and she went in posing as a broker and said she had some clients interested in buying this bar. And the guy so happened he wanted to sell the bar because his wife had just run off with one of his best customers. Oh, yeah. So he wanted
memories in that.
Yeah,
bar.
right. He wanted to get out of there. So it was $30,000. We scraped together a $3,000 down payment. He gave us a note for the balance payable over like 3 years, I think it was, and we had ourselves a bar. It was a beer and wine bar.
That's $30,000 for a bar. That just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, this is 1986.
Oh, so. Yeah. I mean, those numbers, sure, but people listening.
But yeah. Nowadays, I mean, you're talking, $350, $400 for a similar type. It was pretty rundown, divey place. The clientele was a bunch of old timers. We went in and didn't really do much other than change the staff and add a nice jukebox with really good music. And within 4 or 5 months, the place was packed 5-6 nights a week.
Now, were you presenting shows as well, or
I was still doing shows. I quit. I kept doing shows through that time. I finally stopped probably in about 1987. I think one of the last shows I did was a show with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and the Dickies at the North Park Theater. Mm-hmm. Which was, I forget what it was called back then. It might have been North Park Theater still. But this place got trashed. Oh. People ripped, it had seats back then, and people ripped out a bunch of seats, and, it was like I lost a bunch of money on it. And by that time, the Pink Panther was starting to ramp up and do pretty well. So I kind of just stopped doing shows. There was also a lot of violence at the shows in San Diego back then, skinhead problems.
Yeah.
And bands getting beaten up, and just I got sick of the whole thing.
Were you doing concerts at Pink Panther? Or
No, it was a tiny place. There was there was no room to have a band there.
And what do you think led to the success of Pink Panther? I mean,
because the fact that it was the first bar in San Diego owned by young people for young people.
Oh,
back in those years, all the bars in town were owned by older generation, and you'd still go to them, but I can remember going to the Ken Club or the Alibi back then, and it was it was an old person's bar. Mm-hmm. Most of the clientele was older. The ownership was definitely older. The jukeboxes were playing older music. And the Pink Panther, it was like, okay, we were young. We were all involved in punk rock and stuff at the time. And we had DJs who came in and spun new music. And it just became a great place to go and have fun for young people.
At the time, Tim took a backup job at Broadway clothing store, just in case things fell through. But the Pink Panther was packed nightly, and in 1987, Tim walked away from his day job and has never gone back.
In '89, we got the option. A broker, a real broker,
not just
called us and asked if we were interested in buying this place on Kettner Boulevard called the Harp and Shamrock. And we went over and looked at it, and it's like at that time we were like, oh, we should open a place where we can do live music. And we looked at it. It was a struggling Irish bar.
Seems like they all are.
Yeah, it was. It was weird. And we went in and looked at it, and this was only $35,000. And we bought it and turned it into the Casbah. And we opened there in '89.
Now, did you buy and open the Casbah with the intent of making it a concert venue, or was it just another bar?
No, it was, we wanted to do live music. We put a tiny stage in there. It wasn't. We didn't plan to do music to the extent we do now.
Yeah.
It was more we were going to do some R&B stuff, some singer-songwriter. We actually had an espresso machine when we first opened. It was going to be a kind of more kind of casual, lighter musical thing than it turned out to be. But at the time, so we opened in '89. One of the partners was Harlan Schiffman, who had a company called Fine Line Entertainment, when I quit doing shows in '87, he kind of took up the slack and all the stuff that I did. So he was doing shows at Spirit Club, Rio's, which was over in Point Loma. He did a bunch of the shows at Iguanas when that opened.
Oh,
he did a lot of the bigger shows there. And he became a partner in the new venture we were doing in Casbah.
To clarify, the original Casbah, the one that Tim is talking about here, was actually about 2 blocks north of where the Casbah sits now. It was about half the size and only fit 75 people. But because of Harlan and Tim's friendship, every big underground and indie band played the Casbah. In 1990, 2 huge things happened. Nirvana played the Casbah, and underground music everywhere became huge, even right here in San Diego. I want to take a second here because we're getting into territory that as a old San Diego musician and as a DJ here for years on 94.9, the Casbah is just a legendary place for most people. So in those early days when it was small and you had bands like Nirvana coming in, Nirvana, if we're talking 1990, that was right around when they started to get more and more popular. They hadn't broken huge yet.
Right. Just before the record came out.
Just before the record.
Yep.
So what was that like to see a band like Nirvana come in and then, I don't know, because I don't know what it's like, and then to just see them break huge? Did you think as a person who books bands a lot, this band's going to be huge? Or
no, it was really hard. I actually missed the Nirvana show.
Oh, yeah.
I was out of town that weekend on a pre-planned trip. But shortly thereafter, the Smashing Pumpkins came through. And just before they broke huge as well. And so you could, seeing that show, you're like, okay, yeah, these guys are going to be huge. But in the confines of a 75 capacity club with maybe 125 people stuffed in there, right then and there, it's great. But yeah, it's all hit and miss as far as somebody becoming big. There's so many circumstances beyond just that happening right then and there. So it was always hard to say, but what we had going for us was that Harlan had been doing all these types of shows for a couple of years leading up to the Casbah opening. And I started getting calls from people I had dealt with back before I quit. So we had the in on all these emerging artists because of the booking agents that we had cultivated relationships with. And that's kind of what got us off the ground. Now, at the time, the Casbah was going strong in those early years. The only other place that was doing shows was, Brick by Brick had just become Brick by Brick around that same time. But the ownership they had back then was really just not up to the task. So they kind of ran the place into the ground. There was Bodie's downtown, owned by Brett Bodie from the Ken Club. And he was doing shows at the same time we were, but being downtown and the whole thing, it just didn't take off there like it did at the Casbah. So we just kept plugging away, and it got to the point where after a couple years there, we started looking for ways to expand.
The real broker they worked with found them another spot just down the road on the corner of Kettner and Laurel. At the time, it was a bar called Bulk, and Tim had never been inside.
So he arranged for us to come and do a walkthrough, and we went in, and right out of the gate, they had full liquor license, which Casbah was only beer and wine. So we were just like, oh, that's great. We walked in, they had the patio and the little back room, and 3 times the capacity of what we were looking at in the original location. But the thing that sealed the deal was they had a little office with a private bathroom. Because of the old Casbah, there was no private bathroom. And so employees, owners, staff, we'd have to get in line and go to the bathroom just like anybody else. So we walked in and saw the bathroom. We're like, we'll take it, you know. And believe it or not, we paid $35,000 for that place.
Really?
Yes. This is in 1993.
So at this time in 1993, did you still have ownership of the Pink Panther as well?
No. Okay. Pink Panther had closed in 1990.
Okay.
We lost our lease there. Somebody bought the property and didn't want a bar there, so we lost the lease.
Gotcha.
So it was like from 90 through 93, it was strictly the Casbah. We took ownership. We bought this place, the current place, in late 93, got our license approved in early 94, and opened in 94 there.
I have to ask 2 questions about the Casbah that I've probably always wanted to ask you that I'm sure you've gotten 5,000 times. So I apologize. 1, why the Casbah? Where did the name come from?
My partner Bob came up with that name somehow, and I can't remember how. It was definitely not based on the Clash song. It was something, I think, he grew up in Pittsburgh, and I think when he was living there back in probably the early 70s, there must have been a place called the Casbah that he was fond of or frequented. But, we're not sure.
But it sounds cool.
Yeah,
so
it's great. And so many people think it's Rock the Casbah. Is that song written about the Casbah? I'm like, no, that was about 7 or 8 years prior to that.
What's funny is growing up, I always heard that the Clash had written it about the Casbah.
Right.
And you should go with that one.
Well, we would, but the song came out about 8 years before we opened.
Nobody knows dates anymore.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And my other question is, there's apartments above the Casbah.
Yes, that's always asked.
Yeah. So were you there first, or were they there first?
No, they've been there all along. There's been apartments up there ever since that building is. The whole building is ground floor is a club, upstairs is apartments. It's been that way from probably when the building was built. Back in the 50s, the Casbah was a bar, and there was an apartment out back. The patio area was a driveway.
Oh, wow.
And if you go straight back, there was a garage. You can kind of tell there's 2 separate water heaters in the building, and there's patios, and there's windows in interior spots where there's no reason for a window. So it was definitely 2 separate buildings back then. So it was a bar in the 50s. It was a gay bar for many, many years during the 60s and 70s and 80s probably. Mostly gay, sometimes lesbian. So it's got a long history. The landlord owns our building, and they've got all the little houses up behind it in the back too. They own that whole corner, and the rest there's four units above the Casbah. Some of the people have lived there a long time. Some people have raised kids there. We've only had one instance where somebody actually complained about noise.
Wow.
Years and years ago, where a new tenant moved in, and when they move in, they're pretty much aware that there's a nightclub downstairs and there's jets landing above.
Yeah.
And one day we're out on the patio, and this lady leans out from the window above, and, hey, can you guys maybe turn the music down tonight? And I look at my friend who was standing there with me, and I'm like, probably not. I don't think that's going to happen. And she called the police on us a week or 2 later. One night, and they came, and we're just like, hey, we've been here for 5 years. What's this? Well, we got to respond to a complaint, So do what you can to keep the noise down. And I called my landlord the next day and said, hey, this woman upstairs called in the police to complain on us. And she's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to get her to move. So she gave her an eviction notice. And
Oh, wow.
we've never had complaints other than that.
It's incredible to me you had one complaint about that.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
But good for you.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure.
mean, well, it's kind of, it's a given. And pay attention to where, I mean, if you're not aware of what you're getting into, then, that's on you.
The Casbah layout to a lot of people, to me personally, is pretty legendary in itself, only because it feels to me like you're at a punk rock club. Like growing up in the, I was coming of age in the early 90s listening to all that early punk music, going to Iguanas, going to the old shows at Golden Hall that they used to hold, getting kicked in the shins, all that fun stuff. And what I love about the Casbah is when you walk in, you feel like you're somewhere where you're going to hear something cool. You know what I mean? Whereas it's not some clean, nice.
Yeah, and it's
venue.
like, it's gritty.
Yeah.
And we haven't really changed anything.
And was that kind of your intention, that you just wanted to make it a...
No, I mean, I think more in the beginning, it was just, we didn't have any money. So we just, everything looks better with some paint and at night with some lights.
Sure.
And so you paint it and you string some Christmas lights here and there. And, people who come in during the day, even now, like, oh, wow, I've never been here in the daytime before. This place, it looks a little different. I'm like, yeah, well, we don't open the daytime, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, and right now we're actually doing for the first time in all these years, we're doing some work in the back room to make it a little more comfortable and some more seating. We're putting in a couple booths and doing some new lighting in the back room. But other than that, there's not been really any reason to change anything.
The Casbah's success continued to trend upward. With Harlan now as an official partner in the club, they had incredible access to some of the best bands of the 90s and early 2000s, including The Breeders, Cat Power, Liz Phair, White Stripes, Bright Eyes, Death Cab for Cutie, and many more. They established great relationships early on with several booking agencies, and as the legend of the Casbah grew, so did bands' desire to play there. It became the spot for bands on the brink or punk rock headliners to play. When we come back from the break, we'll hear how Tim Mays expanded the Casbah's impact without leaving the venue, and how his entrepreneurial mindset didn't stop at music.
Once I wanted to be the greatest. No matter what I focused on me. And then came the rush of the flood. Stars of night turned deep to dust. Melt me down. There's a big black armor. Leave no trace of grace, just in your honor.
This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored in part by the Downtown San Diego Partnership. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members, foundations, and sponsors like the Downtown Partnership. We are very grateful for all of our donors, and we will recognize their support during the show. Join the Downtown San Diego Partnership on Saturday, April 21st for East Village Sessions, a popular free workout event held on the streets of downtown San Diego. This one-day fitness event offers various workouts that will start your weekend off right. Join the Downtown Partnership at 8th Avenue and J Street for one class, or stay for all 5. Visit downtownsandiego.org for details and to register today. And if you like Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
Hey, welcome back to I Made It in San Diego. I'm Dallas McLaughlin. Tim Mays may have started as a small-time promoter for punk shows in the early 1980s, but by 1995, he had built the Casbah, considered to be the music venue in San Diego by bands looking to make a name for themselves or those underground artists looking to break big. By the late 1990s, Tim and his club partner, Harlan Schiffman, had been booking and promoting some of the biggest names in rock music. But what about the bands that were too big to play the Casbah? Well, they had a plan. Here's Tim.
Those bands were all, on the way up, and Bright Eyes and White Stripes and Death Cab for Cutie, all those bands too, that they started out. I mean, when they started out, they would draw 50, 60 people.
Sure.
And so we were able to nurture them, get to the point where they can sell out the Casbah, and then as they got bigger, the booking agencies would work with us in taking them to bigger rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's kind of led to where we're at today, where we put on all these shows all over town. Is back then it was like, okay, well, they're too big to play the Casbah. Let's go to Soma, or let's go to House of Blues, or let's go to Brick by Brick. And, for years I tried to get the Belly Up to let me book shows there. And for a long time they were reluctant. That was under the previous ownership. Finally, the current owners came in and they brought in a new booking person, and we were able to work a deal with them to where we could put shows there. So, we do 30 or 40 shows a year at the Belly Up with the Belly Up. We likewise started working with other places that are same size or smaller, like Soda Bar, Space, Hideout, whatever, just to facilitate the amount of bands that would want to play that we didn't have room for on our calendar.
Yeah.
And so, on any given night, I think last night we had 3 different shows. Tonight we've got 3 different shows in
Wow.
various places in town. And it's over those years from 94 through this, that aspect of the business has grown. I mean, we're kind of locked in at the Casbah because of the capacity and how many nights a year can you open. And, we're running pretty good. Last few years have been really great. But, it's always just staying on top of things. And I credit that, even more so now than back then, to the booking agents that I work with who cultivate the great artists that we get.
Well, I remember the night that my band sold out the Casbah, and pretty much I think we quit soon after that because I didn't know what else we could do that was going to be better than that. It was quite I remember calling my girlfriend at the time,
Which band was that?
Bad Credit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. My girlfriend had long stopped coming to shows. She had paid her
Oh, yeah.
dues.
She'd seen you enough times, right? She wasn't obligated to go
just
anymore.
another night at the Casbah.
Right.
I don't need to go. And I remember walking up and the sold out, written in chalk, sold out on the board, and I about crapped my pants. It's just such a wonderful place to be. Was there a time during that slow climb, I guess, where maybe you wanted to walk away? Maybe you had enough, too many headaches? I mean, because it seems like a hard thing to do to run a small club.
No, back then, so 94 through probably early 2000s, maybe 2008, probably about 2004 or 5, myself and Bob, we ran the place pretty much nuts and bolts. I mean, we were both there during the day, doing the ordering, doing the promoting. I was there 5 days a week taking phone calls for booking. People would send in CDs. I'd go try and listen to them all. And Bob kind of ran the bar stuff, and we were probably there between us, each of us 5-6 nights a week for years and years. After that, I kind of decided to try and delegate some stuff and have other people do other things. And I met my wife in 2008. So around that time, I stopped being there as much at night and had people who could do some of the stuff that I had to do, so I could concentrate more on the booking and promotion rather than the actual running of the actual day-to-day place. Bob, got sick and kind of quit working there in, I think, 2010, and he passed away a few years later. But so he stopped. So then, at this point, and to this day, I have a bar manager and a production manager who basically run the place. I can go. I do not need to be there at night to run it for a show to go off right. I check in with the guys a couple times a week. We have meetings and we make sure everybody knows what's going down and what needs to be done. But they're very good at their jobs. They've both been there for years and years, and that's what enables me to do what I do, because I spend most of my time just booking bands at not only Casbah, which is, probably we're open there 355 days a year. But all the other shows, between all the other venues we do, we're probably looking at another 120 shows a year on top of what we do at the Casbah.
A mutual friend of ours, he I remember he used to manage Bad Credit for years, and I remember one day he said, "Hey, you want to grab some coffee?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, let's grab some coffee." He's like, "Let's go to Tim's place." And for some reason, I thought we were going to your house, but we weren't.
I don't even drink coffee.
But we weren't. We were going to Krakatoa, which I had no idea you had owned. And then it turns out you just have a lot of things here in town. So what, after being at the Casbah for a while, what spurned you wanting to open up a coffee shop and this and that?
So, even during the Casbah years in the 90s, the Livewire opened, I think, in 97. Sam and Joe are friends of mine, and Joe and I had always talked about wanting to just own a cocktail bar. Mm-hmm. This was back then. Livewire was just beer and wine, and so we got a call from a mutual friend who knew the people who owned the Turf Club in Golden Hill, and that place had been boarded up for a couple years, but the owners wanted to see if somebody wanted to come in and revive it. So their friend called us, and we were like, yeah, we'd love to. We had been, I had been there back in the day. And so we went in there and we struck a deal with the owners of the building to go in and reopen it. And this was in 98. Mm-hmm. We went in and the place was completely trashed. We were able to salvage the wallpaper in the booths and the bar. We had to redo a lot of the stuff in there, and we reopened in 98. Back then, Golden Hill was a pretty gnarly neighborhood. And I remember when we opened, our opening night, we brought in Sam as a partner too. So it was Sam Shamus, Joe Austin, and myself. We opened, and in case you're not familiar with the Turf Club, the whole deal is that there's a grill in the middle of the room where you cook your own steaks. And a really beautiful cocktail lounge. And so we opened it, and there was news media there, and it was like, oh, people coming into this blighted neighborhood opening this business. And we had the first night, there was a line to get in. We ran out of food. That was 98. We had a really, really great run there for 10 years. But a couple years after we opened there, the little house next door across the alley was a house at the time. It came up for sale because the owner of the house died. And we put in a bid on it. We had to outbid 3 other people right in that same neighborhood to get this house. And we did it with the idea of opening a coffee shop. And so we opened there in, I think, 2003. We renovated this house, built the deck outside, and opened a coffee shop. And that was just something we, wanted to do to embellish what we did already. And we figured the neighborhood was up and coming, which, we were way ahead of the curve there.
With your music ventures up to this point, it seems like you were opening these clubs and opening these bars with a purpose. So you opened up the Pink Panther because you wanted a bar for young people to hang out at. Casbah was a place to book bands and see bands and be a part of the music scene. With the Turf Club in Krakatoa, was that just seeing an opportunity, or was that also going like, hey, I want people to come to this kind of a shop?
Well, I think a natural progression of, okay, owning a bar for young people, then presenting a place where people can come see music. But as we got older and our core audience got older, there's other things in life. Mm-hmm. So the Turf Club was, I think we all 3 of us have a love for vintage, old school things. Like, we don't like to change them. Mm-hmm. We didn't go in and remodel the Turf Club. We went in and restored the Turf Club. Mm-hmm. And the kitsch factor of the grill in the room, and just the fact that it was a cocktail bar, which we wanted to do, was a natural thing for us. And, all the people who had been going to shows at the Casbah for all those years, and even before the Casbah, were older now, where they could go and appreciate the ability to go have a nice dinner and a nice drink. The same thing with a coffee shop, and the coffee culture obviously has exploded now, but back then it was kind of just getting off the ground. So those were both kind of natural progressions of the whole reason we got into the whole business in the first place.
So You open up these two places. They're successful. I mean, anytime I go to Krakatoa, it's full of people.
Yeah, that's done well. We lost the turf club. Our landlord got greedy after seeing us run it for 10 years and decided not to renew our lease, and subsequently took it over himself and is doing the same thing we did there for all that time. So I haven't set foot in the turf club since the day we left.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, it was a bad scene. But, that happens with landlords a lot. So from there, we moved out we opened a place in La Mesa called Riviera Supper Club.
Yeah.
Similar concept to the turf club. We put a big grill, 3 sizes the one at the turf club, in the middle of the room, much bigger place. This was in 2008. So we went out there. We spent a lot of money on remodel. This place we bought in La Mesa didn't have anything to restore from. It had to be completely recreated to make it a mid-century type modern looking place that it is now. So we went in there. We spent way too much money back then. We figured, okay, our clientele will travel with us to La Mesa. And they did at first, but after a while, the drive out there gets to be a bit much. And so we struggled for about 3 years there.
And that neighborhood didn't really turn around like Golden Hill did.
No, we knew it was up and coming, but we were just, again, a little bit too early out there. So after about 3 years, we got tired of having to go to the bank every day to deposit money to cover checks and things like that. And it just wasn't panning out. So we sold it. Mm-hmm. Got out of there. Well, actually, it was 5. When did we sell it? We sold it 5 years ago. So we were there 5 years. So after 5 years, we got out, and then I didn't do anything. Well, Starlite.
Yeah, I was going to say Starlite. Yeah.
Okay, Starlite was around the same time too. We did that in 2007. We did Starlite.
Okay.
Matt Hoyt and myself did that. Matt Hoyt I had known from bands. He used to book a club called the Soul Kitchen out in El Cajon.
Oh, God, so many
memories.
memories.
He was in that band Turkey Mallet. So he and I became good friends, and he and I opened Starlite with Steve Poltz, and Harlan, my Casbah partner, is a partner there as well. And that's been going strong for 11 years. I don't have much to do on the day-to-day there anymore at all. Matt runs the place pretty much, but it's still a great restaurant, great bar.
Great bar.
Beautiful. I mean, the food is amazing. The drinks are amazing. The setting is just ideal. So
yeah, there was a show I worked on called Film in Diego, and we actually did a segment there with Matt. Because he shot music videos.
Right, exactly.
And we did a segment there, and we learned the whole bar area was supposed to be after the North by Northwest, right?
Yeah. I had gone up to, so Matt and I, again, had been discussing, after the Turf Club, after we lost that, it's like, okay, I want to open another cocktail lounge. Mm-hmm. And I had gone up to Portland and seen some places up there that, like the Doug Fir Lounge, I don't know if you've ever been there. The Douglas Fir Lounge in Portland. It's a combination bar, restaurant, music venue, but it's got the similar type of decor. And then the North by Northwest house and all that. So those were the ideas behind the instructions we gave to the designers to build the place.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Yeah. One of my favorite stories, probably not one of your favorite stories, but one of my favorite stories about Starlight was quickly after you guys opened, you had to tell customers to stop stealing your mugs.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like that was the first place in town that started using those mugs, and then now everyone uses those mugs.
Yeah, it's funny because the Moscow Mule had been a drink that was around back in the 40s originally, and who had one up till recently. So when we opened Starlight, we wanted some kind of signature drink, and our bar manager at the time, Kate Wentz, she's like, "Well, let's make a mule." We're like, well, okay, and nobody knew what was in it, and we had to look it up, and the whole deal was serving in the copper mugs. So we got these great big mugs, and there was a time when we first opened when everybody in the place, that's all they drank, and people would steal the mugs too, and we definitely had to rethink that. But no, it's still our most popular drink there.
Despite all the ups and downs of running and opening several different businesses, Tim still finds time to open some more. With no plans to retire anytime soon, he recently became a partner in North Park Soda Bar and opened a small record shop in South Park called Vinyl Junkies. Tim Mays found a way to put his passion to work, but like most of us, we never know if it'll pan out.
I didn't consciously think of that when I started doing this. So like I said, when I first started promoting concerts, it was a hobby. And I did have a job, and I had a couple different jobs during that time. Luckily, those jobs I had were people who were very cool and let me actually use their phones and time to book shows while I was at work. But, having been able to then break free of that constraint of working for somebody else on a set schedule and having to wear a certain thing, like when I worked at the Broadway, I had to wear a suit every day.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, never consciously occurred to me that I was able to do that. But, after doing it for so long, it's like, I've created a job for myself that I'm able to make a good living at and able to employ a lot of people, a lot of whom are friends. And I've met a lot of great people doing so. So, it's just it kind of came about that way. Without any time. I never once said I don't want to work for the man, I just was lucky enough to not have to after a certain point.
And you start off with it sounded like a $3,000 investment into your own business. And now, obviously if we don't have to say real numbers, but, and now you have several businesses that you're a part of. You must be living very comfortably.
Yeah. I mean, I don't own yachts or planes or anything like that, but I've got a nice car and I've got a great house, and my wife has a nice car, and we travel, and things are good. Yeah, I cannot complain.
Tim Mays is a fixture here in San Diego, and he's created a meeting point for the culturally affluent and those looking to be. Meanwhile, he's created opportunities for dozens of local bands and artists, helped turn neighborhoods into thriving communities, and still finds time to think of what's next. If you've never been to the Casbah or Vinyl Junkies or Starlite, go see what all the fuss is about. Just don't steal the mugs.
Thanks for listening to Voices San Diego podcasts. This show is part of the Voices San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast. There you'll learn more about our award-winning arts and education podcast, CultureCast and Good Schools for All, the Cura Chaos podcast about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business show, I Made It in San Diego, our sports show, The Kept Faith, and the rest of the shows in the network. Voices San Diego is a nonprofit. The majority of our budget comes from grants and donations from readers and listeners like you. If you like the show, please take a minute to go to voicessandiego.org and click the donate button. Or if you have a business and would like to sponsor the show, contact development@voicessandiego.org or call 619-550-5664.